We deal in paint, pigment, light and shadow, realism, surrealism, impressionism, and ghost stories.
An interest in the oddball, a predilection toward the bizarre. And this place is nothing if it isn't bizarre.
There's no admission, no requirement of membership, only a strong and abiding belief in the dark at the top of the stairs, or things that go bump in the night. The name of this place, should you have come in here accidentally out of the rain, is the Night Gallery.
Welcome to Midnight Viewing, the Night Gallery podcast. I am Father Malone.
I'm Chris Stachiw.
And I'm Mike White.
And we are taking a look at Rod Serling's follow-up to The Twilight Zone, The Night Gallery, which aired on NBC from 1969 to 1973. Now, I'm a big fan of this show and have been for many years, but I'm curious what your first experiences were with the show. Start with you, Chris.
Well, as someone who spent the better part of, what did we calculate it out to, like 3.5 years talking about The Twilight Zone 1985, to come to this show, I'm not going to say I have any experience with this show. I don't. But I do have experience with anthology TV shows, Tales from the Crypt, Twilight Zone, that Creep Show reboot, that Twilight Zone reboot. And, I mean, I'm a fan of anthology shows anyways, because, I know anthology shows are exciting, but for this show, it's just exposure to Rod Serling, primarily. And getting to see Rod Serling in color immediately is just, it's just strange. It's a trip. It's a total trip.
With that magnificent coif of hair.
Oh.
Right?
Imagine, if you will. I love his
We got him at
voice.
his most leathery, too.
Oh, boy.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. He's so tan. Him and Jack Palance are going to the same tanning salon at the same time.
It's like you can see the on his skin.
Oh, my God. Yeah, it's hanging in the... We need some ambiance, Rod. Let me just light up a cigarette here real quick.
It's one of the director's notes is never a close-up of Rod's hands. Keep away from his fingers. How about you, Mike?
So I have a false memory of watching this show and being a fan of it. We talked a few months ago about this show, and I was like, oh man, remember that Roddy McDowell episode and how great that was and how creepy it is, the paintings and getting to see the progression, and that's it, man. I've seen the pilot. I remember that. I remember the Joan Crawford. Don't really remember that third episode too well, but I think I must have just rented this, and that one episode just burned its way onto my brain. Second episode was pretty good. It was some sort of obscure director did it, but I seem to remember he had a lot of potential. But
He directed that first Columbo episode, didn't he?
Well,
that first one.
Yeah.
That first one, right? Because we didn't mention it on our Columbo show.
right.
Don't come at us with wrong information.
Exactly. Don't say nothing slick to a can of oil. But yeah, so I'm here, man. I'm strapped in and ready to go with this because, I apparently have never seen more than 2 episodes, maybe 3 of this entire show.
That is fantastic.
exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
I'm so excited to not be the odd man out this time.
Woohoo.
Because I think every other time, aside from Chronicles, I've kind of been the odd man out.
Yeah, I think, now for me, by this time I have seen the entire series, probably more than once. My first contact with it was, I was very young, maybe like 7 or 8 years old. I remember there was an ad that played for a syndicated version of the show, where the ad was just the credit sequence for the show, which is the series of paintings and freaky soundtrack by Gil Millet, which scared me so much that I was sent out of the room. And then, like you, Mike, I didn't experience it again until I found a videotape of the pilot, which they've released. And yeah, I remember the Roddy McDowell episode stunningly, the Joan Crawford one definitely, and then something in South America, kind of.
No expenses were spared.
And I've seen the pilot episode, I don't know how many times since, but I don't know if I doze off by the end or just I trail. I don't know what it is, but I never do. So just a little bit of backstory about the show itself. Now, obviously, Rod Serling ran the Twilight Zone from 1959 to about 1964. He writes some scripts here and there. Planet of the Apes, for instance. At a certain point in the late 60s, decides to get back onto television and proposes a TV series called Rod Serling's Wax Museum, where it was going to be a different wax museum vignette that comes to life week in, week out. People at NBC didn't like that idea but wanted to do a show with him. They partnered him up with a producer named Jack Laird. They reworked it based on the fact that there were paintings appearing in 2 of the 3 stories anyway. Decided it was going to be a night gallery, so they pitched it as a 90-minute pilot, which is what we're talking about today. Originally aired on NBC's 4-in-1 block, so it was like 4 different shows rotating in the same time slot every week. There was McCloud and The Psychiatrist and San Francisco International. Night Gallery was the only sort of winner in that and got a first season, although a truncated first season, and with Rod Serling writing the bulk of the first season. And the pilot that we're talking about right now originally aired on November 8th, 1969. Now, the first segment is called The Cemetery. It was written by Rod Serling, directed by Boris Sagal. That's the Omega Man's Boris Sagal. That is father of Peggy Bundy, Katie Sagal. Also, father of Liz and Jean Sagal, which, for those of you who are fans of The Obscure, they were the twins in Grease 2, and they had their own television series for one season called Double Trouble. I'm sure, Mike, you remember these girls.
I do not know.
Oh, my God. All right.
It's been a long time since I've seen Grease.
Our initial offering, a small Gothic item in blacks and grays. A piece of the past known as the family crypt. This one we call simply the cemetery. Offered to you now, 6 feet of earth and all that it contains.
This particular episode stars Roddy McDowall, Ozzie Davis, and Barry Atwater, who's going to show up again in season 3 of Night Gallery. In fact, he was on the original Twilight Zone in Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. That later episode of the Night Gallery and the show, the Twilight Zone show he was on, he was given a whole lot more to do than he was given here.
He was given a lot to do in another show that we've talked about it once. That man was a vampire.
Yes,
he was.
Janos Skorzeny. As soon as I
was.
saw him, I was like, you dastardly vampire, you. And we are huge fans of The Wheel because Mike and I are talking about a show on The Wheel, like this show. That show being Columbo was also on The Wheel, was it not? Right?
Yes,
it was on that same rotation.
It absolutely was, and I'm going to be doing a show about Banachek, which also appeared on the
the
same
wheel.
said wheel, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good model. They don't think they use that nowadays. I mean, now it's like the extended mid-season break, which always feels a little cheating.
Very cheating.
You know, like, oh, I'm going to give you 4 episodes. Well, I think it was like 6 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. Then we're going to take a 2-month hiatus, and then we're going to come back with 4 more episodes. It's like, really?
Just give us
on,
the
guys.
show.
I don't even understand why you would release episodes piecemeal anymore anyways. Just give everybody the content. They're going to watch it all anyways. Who fucking cares?
Yes, the content will be viewed. Why? We're going to, and probably multiple times by the time you would have released the entire show.
And there may even be something to be said for people like myself who don't watch things until they're completely out.
Right.
Anyways,
Yeah.
People ask me for the last couple weeks, have you watched Boba Fett? Have you watched Boba Fett? And it's no, because it's not over yet. When it's over, I'll watch it, so I don't have to wait. And you know what? If it's spoiled for me, that's my fault. That's actually my fault because I waited.
Boba Fett? Not over yet.
I wish Barry Atwater was in Boba Fett.
Okay. Now, listen, in this particular story of Cemetery, we got Roddy McDowall. He's playing a black sheep nephew to an ailing, wealthy painter in his family, and he's hatched a plot to inherit that fortune, but doesn't really account for his uncle's trusted associate, Portafoy. Does everyone love the name Portafoy after watching this episode?
Oh, boy.
Portafoy.
How many... Take a
Portafoy?
drink, man.
Portafoy.
Well, then why do you load it up that way, Portafoy? That is wasteful, Portafoy. Tell me something, Portafoy. So dwell on it, Portafoy. She had her dignity to consider, Portafoy. Portafoy. Oh, no, Portafoy. Portafoy!
Mr. Portafoy to you.
Portafoy.
I was amazed that was George McCready as the old man. He did not look like the George McCready. I mean, he died a couple years after this, but
yeah.
I mean, I love George McCready. He is so good, especially in things like Paths of Glory or The Big Clock. I mean, he always had that amazing scar on his face, and I was like, who is this old man? And it did not click with me that was him.
What'd you think of the episode, Chris?
It's funny how many times they can tell this kind of story and do it differently. Because this is essentially the Telltale Heart. We talked about something else recently that was just like this, where it's the same framing device of I kill someone and then somehow the universe revisits me through symbolism or actual haunting sometimes. Sometimes it's what this is. But this kind of has its cake and eats it too, which I appreciate because it gives you both. And most of the time it's one or the other, not both. Sometimes it's just misinterpreting reality for the supernatural. And sometimes it actually is the supernatural. And I like that this has both because that's smarter than one or the other. If you can do it both, if you can do both correctly, it's smarter and it works better. But I enjoyed it, even though it's rather simple. Even though Roddy McDowall is his accent, he's doing something. It's a choice.
Yeah.
We'll just say it's a choice. It's a choice. And I love seeing Ozzie Davis and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's amazing in the only other thing I know him from, which is Bubba Hotep, which was the JFK wisecrack.
Well, that's not true.
So-
We watched a movie he directed called Cotton Comes to Harlem.
Right. But he wasn't in it,
No,
though.
but you've seen his work
That's the only
before.
time I've seen him on... Yeah, that's true. But this is the only other time I've seen him in something.
Yeah.
Looking real dapper, real slick.
Oh,
What
yeah.
a great actor. What a great actor.
This segment sort of retroactively has always reminded me of the movie Creepshow, particularly the opening segment, Father's Day. Not only because, I read an interview with Stephen King which said when he sat down to write the screenplay, he thought, okay, someone has to come out of the ground, which always seems to be the way to lead off an anthology thing, lead off with the piercing the grave and getting back into the world. I don't know why that is, but this seems like Father's Day seems like the purer version of this sort of thing, right down to the old man and the inheritance and everything. I like this too. I agree with you when it's pulled off well, Chris, giving us the Scooby-Doo ending and then the supernatural ending can be really effective.
Right.
I didn't find it effective in this particular one. I actually kind of felt cheated a little bit when it turns out it was just Portafoy all along. Maybe I just always wanted to be supernatural. Overall, I do really like the episode. I always have been a fan of Boris Sagal. I think he's an interesting filmmaker. I think he's never been big on lighting, as we can see in this particular episode, unfortunately, because we've got it's all sets, but the sets are beautiful. They just needed 10 minutes more to put some lights up.
Yeah, kind of flat.
Yeah, because Seagal does something here that I loved when Roddy McDowall has finally decided he's killing his relative, his uncle, I guess, and puts him in the window. We cut to the exterior of the window, and we've got this crazy zoom out, and then a crane that pans over a cemetery thing, and then we get another zoom into a grave. It's absolutely crazy. And I think zooms seem like really cliche and lame, but I think it's because people don't use them correctly. This guy's using them correctly. I can only imagine what Boris Sagal would do with a drone. Giving us just a shot like that on a television show that,
Probably something close to that video that they did, was it last year on that...
with the bowling alley, yeah.
Yeah, something close to that. I'm curious, Father Malone, you said you felt cheated by the ending, but did it not retroactively fix what you were talking about by giving you the actual
It does, but
then it still doesn't give you anything.
no, it doesn't. And then it's weird that it's kind of happenstance that it's now it is the painting is exacting revenge, and he put the original painting back up. I don't know. There's a lot going on there, and plus, why is he bragging to the painter?
Right.
What?
Yeah.
The number one rule of crime is tell 0 people if you can. And he says, let me lay it out for you. If it didn't work that way, here was my other plan to do it. I'm like, Portafoy, you deserve to die.
That is the conclusion that I came to is, hey, this scene is tacked on because they need to give us a reason to hate him.
Yeah, maybe.
I would have paid that painter before the whole thing happened, though I guess he didn't have all the money. But you would think Portafoy had saved something.
He had to have, 15 paintings at $500 a pop?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With an extra $500 for your troubles. I liked it. I bought into that it was supernatural, then it was revealed that it wasn't. I was like, okay, I'm fine with that. I kind of like the idea of Portafoy just sneaking in there. Here's another painting.
Right.
Oh, here's another one. It's closer. The guy's closer. And then I kind of like that it twisted and that he ends up being a victim of his own thing, but much more in a supernatural way. I don't know. I dug it. And the idea, seeing the little coffin and the coffin open and that creepy, the creepy neighbors from the Flintstones, like that type of artwork of the skeleton coming out. It's just like, yeah, I'm here for this. This is really fucked up.
Yeah, I'm with you. I enjoyed it. And I like the idea that at the end it's like, nope, I am going to return the favor that you paid to me. I'm gonna fuck you up. Because, I mean, I can only assume the way the ending is written that Roddy McDowall's corpse is walking through that door.
Yeah,
Right.
momentarily.
And he's coming. Yeah, he's coming. Like, the door opens, and Ozzie Davis gets his, jaw ripped off, or God knows what happens. Yeah.
Boy, do I want that painting. There's one particular painting of the corpse coming, and it's definitely Roddy McDowall. Like, the likeness is so perfect. I
Right.
want that
Love it.
painting hanging on my wall.
I like Roddy McDowall in this too, even his accent notwithstanding. It's all over the place, but he's fun in this episode. He plays
Yeah.
a turd real well.
Oh boy, yes, he does.
I never disbelieve Roddy McDowall. When he's being sincere, he's the absolute most sincere. And I'm thinking about his scene in Fright Night. There's where he's remembering his glory days. It is so beautiful. And then when he's not being sincere, oh my God, he's the least sincere human being on earth, which is what he's doing here. The depths of his insincerity.
I mean, it's very funny.
Do we have to, Barry?
It's so funny because he's going to be playing almost the exact same character in a Columbo episode. So be ready, Chris. In about 2 years, we'll talk about that.
The moment in this episode where he's telling Portafoy he's basically getting $80 and hit the bricks, and he does so by swinging his leg over the banister and sort of like jauntily like kicking it, while at the same time delivering what seems like an actually sincere message. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
So horrible.
That's all that was there for you. $80.
Well, I kind of like, too, that this is 1969. I know that thing is very into civil rights, so I kind of feel like having Ossie Davis in this role, you're kicking off your whole pilot, and one of your main characters is an African-American gentleman who is such a kick-ass actor. I was like, okay, I'm here for this. This is pretty great that you cast him in this role. So I know it's not Rod Serling specifically that cast him, but I thought it was pretty damn cool that this is where they went with this. And, it's kind of like the butler did it, but then the butler gets his comeuppance as well.
Yeah, that's the way the episode, I think, really has it both ways, because we get to see this guy never less than sort of noble and then, taken down just like anyone else would in this world.
Were Ozzie Davis and Ron Glass ever in anything together? Because if they weren't, that feels like a massive missed opportunity.
It does, right? Yeah, I can see them.
It does.
Yeah.
It really does.
I mean, even if Ozzy was just like his, hip uncle or something, that'd be pretty awesome.
Ozzie and Harris.
Oh, nice.
Ozzie and Harris, yeah. I love Ozzie Davis. I can't think of him as anything other than JFK, but he plays sincere and then dastardly just the right
He's
amount.
the mayor in Do the Right Thing.
Do the right thing. Yeah.
All right, moving on. Our next segment is entitled Eyes. Now, this, like the first one, was written by Rod Serling. In fact, the previous story was an original, but this story and the next were both from a short story anthology he had written in 1967. As I said, this is called Eyes, written by Rod Serling, directed by Steven Spielberg, who unfortunately never directed again.
Right, where's he at?
This one stars Joan Crawford, Barry Sullivan, and Tom Bosley, Mr. Cunningham, Mr. C.
Gosh.
It's the tale of a monstrous, aging, old money shrew played by Joan Crawford, who's been blind her entire life. Barry Sullivan's a doctor who has innovated a way to give sight to the sightless for a 12-hour period. The problem being that you need a donor willing to sacrifice their eyesight for a lifetime just so you can see for a half a day. What do you guys think of this one?
I like the fuck you in here of, okay, now you can see, well,
What?
here's the blackout, but you can still see during the blackout. And that she makes it down to the street. I'm like, okay, I'm sure that there are places down there where you can see things better than others, and they probably have a lot of street lights down there, or not street lights, but the headlights from cars. I'm like, you can probably see quite a bit down there. I don't know. I liked some of the things that were going on in here. I really liked Barry Sullivan. Tom Bosley playing the saddest of all sad sacks was pretty funny. And just that scene of him just felt so like, we got to pad this out for a good 10 minutes here. So, Tom, just take it for a walk. I love Tom Bosley, but it feels like he's really just stretching it out there for a while. I liked the Barry Sullivan and Joan Crawford stuff, and her like, oh, here's this file, and you had this woman get an abortion, and you sent her to that person while you're having she was the extramarital affair. And I'm like, That's really good, because she's a total bitch. That's great. But I did like what you said, Father Malone, about the whole thing of this not having a painting, because we never get back to the painting that starts it off. And I was just like, well, why is that? So I'm so glad that you explained that to me.
Yeah. Chris, what'd you think of this
I
one?
just know that tomorrow I'll probably kill myself. Jesus Christ.
That's the odds.
Almighty.
Yeah.
You don't have to go that far to convince us that he's a sad sack. Or even verging on, let's just say, simple. It's almost coded that way, too. I'm not sure, but it kind of feels like it. I think it's okay. I was not as floored by this segment as I thought I would be, given who directed it and who's in it. Joan Crawford's great. Steven Spielberg's direction is good. He does some stuff that you can kind of see where that would end up influencing him, and those influences would show up elsewhere. I think the premise is all right. I think, the kind of the large plot hole of she's in a large metropolitan area in a large skyscraper that would undoubtedly have exit signs should the power go out. It's just, I liked it, and it didn't have anything to do with that. That didn't have anything. That's just me nitpicking and, having a crack at the episode's expense. I just thought it was okay, and then the climax it felt a little weak. Maybe not earned. I mean, she's a terrible character, but it didn't have anything to do with her eyes.
I'll start by also piling on Tom Bosley. I'll still be able to cry out of them, won't I?
That was the funniest shit. Man, what a sad sack.
My God, the maudlin. Look, Tom Bosley is a good actor. He's usually reliable. But this MacGuffin street urchin dialogue from the Bowery Boys that Rod Serling way too often found himself sort of steeped in. It's...
How many papes is Tom Bosley selling? This is the real question. I got 4 papes for my family. 25 cents, $1.
His dialogue sometimes typifies, it's just people like asking themselves questions and then answering them. What kind of a person would do such a thing? I'll tell you what kind. Like, oh, okay, Rod, it isn't 1930s anymore. This isn't the Depression. This isn't the writer's workshop. Anyway.
That was very Death from Meaning of Life. You Englishmen are all the same. I mean, it is like it's such a low hanging fruit way of writing that character. It's just that scene. I don't have an issue with that scene. It's just that scene you can't help but laugh. It's funny how it's if it were played more seriously, it would be depressing. But it's so goofy at how serious they're trying to be.
It makes me really hope that character does get hurt. Like, it's so goofy. Like,
I hope you can.
They really achieve the opposite. And you know what? Just dramatically speaking, like, having it be this old loser makes me, like, it wasn't like somebody with promise who needed their eyes. This was some asshole who you knew, who is given the money for the operation, and his first reaction is, I hope I don't run into a bookie along the way. Like, you fucking dickhead. I hope they take your liver and lungs too.
He's a degenerate gambler. Yeah, he's a degenerate gambler, right?
Yeah. So, and plus,
and I have
not
no
at all.
sympathy
Plus,
for
the whole
him.
scene with him in the fucking gangster, just like this is the plot. This is the only reason anyone ever needs money in a horror anthology or thriller kind of a thing. It's because they owe money to the mob. Like, really? Maybe this guy just needs money. Anyway, so that bothered me too. But I will say, speaking of Mr. Spielberg, this is his first film, right? This is his first paid assignment. And Jesus Christ, he went for it. There are like jump cuts and tracking shots and dissolves. I think he threw a fisheye lens in there at one point. It's pretty remarkable to throw all that in with how restrained the storytelling is, because this is really one of Serling's bottle episodes. It effectively just takes place in the one location.
No split diopter.
The split diopter that was beautiful. Actually, I thought that was really great. It's like throwing it in like a 90-minute pilot for a television series. That's insane. The ambient light issue is the main problem with this episode, and could have been solved so easily had they just said, when you take off your things, make sure you're in a room without windows. And then she wasn't able to get out of the room somehow, until morning. Sure. That could have done at all. Because the stuff with her stumbling around is great. Like, it's really evocative and weird. And, like, even when we go down to the street level, they show us ambient light. Like, just the lights from the headlights of cars would have lit up every building in New York. She would have seen everything. And I agree with you as well, Chris. The unearned ending, I like the idea that she gets that briefest moment of sunlight and then goes blind again and now has to live with that. Like, her falling out the window? What?
Well, she doesn't, though. Yeah. I would rather she lives with it. I kind of don't like that she dies.
Me either. That feels like they were pandering to the audience, not understanding that we just want her to continue to suffer.
Yeah, be miserable. Make everybody else miserable. The way you could write the ending to have her, if they're dead set on having her die, you get rid...
Jump out the window.
Right, you get rid of the window and it be a balcony and she's trying to hold on to the light and goes off the balcony. Or like you said,
yeah, it's clumsily staged or written. One or the other.
How did the window crack? I don't understand that. Did I miss something? Did she throw something at the window?
Didn't she throw herself at the window when the power went out? Isn't that what it was?
Boy, they need better windows up there.
Right? The banging of Joan Crawford causes the windows to break.
Right.
It's the 60s. We don't have the safety glass in yet, the 1 inch thick.
Right. Oh, we replaced the window recently with plexiglass. Yeah. So she doesn't do a whirring Hudsucker.
Exactly. He's merged with the infinite.
It's funny. The original, the first segment of the pilot, I think it was, again, like I had mentioned, it was kind of a generic narrative structure of somebody did something bad and the universe is trying to let them know. This one, it's pretty interesting, and it ends up falling flat.
Yeah.
And that's the shame here, because this premise feels like the Twilight Zone. This premise feels like it could have been in Twilight Zone 5.
Yeah, this could be Burgess Meredith, who finally has all the time in the world, and then he breaks his glasses. But with that, you feel for Burgess Meredith. With this one, you hate Joan Crawford.
Right. Which is, I get it. I understand why the show is wanting to do a bad character gets their comeuppance. And I like that. But that's just not very nuanced. It's just not. It's not a very nuanced story to tell. Because the ending feels unearned. Because, yeah, she's terrible. But good, she's thrown herself out the window. Okay. She can't hurt anybody else.
Right. That would be good.
Other than the person she might land on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back and praise Spielberg again because there was a moment in this that made me laugh out loud where they went to a double exposure from the operation sequence where we've got a double exposure of their eyes on their eyes. And then to get us to the next sequence, a blue dot appears in the center of the screen and then slowly wipes the screen in a corkscrew manner.
Oh.
Bravo, Steven Spielberg. Bravo, 1970s. This was everything for me.
I love it.
This segment gets recommended by me just for that.
There was some interesting angles that he was doing, even in a simple dialogue scene like her talking with Atwater, and you get some high angle, like it's not above, but it's just higher in the apartment.
Yes.
Some really nice framing of those two. I mean, because it could just be a real simple back and forth, but I like her going around the apartment, not stumbling. She knows her way around, even though she's blind, but you feel like she has just stepped through this apartment so many times. And then when she reaches up and touches the statues, I'm like, that's really nice. But yeah, some of those angles, I was like, yeah. But yeah, during the surgery, oh my God, that shot was fantastic.
Well, what's funny is we always talk about Father Malone, these things being like, when we talked about Tales from the Crypt, it was like, oh, this episode's very set-bound. And, oh, I can see the set. This is a set-bound episode. But yet, Spielberg doesn't just say, well, I'm just directing TV, that's good enough.
Right.
Oh,
he
boy.
goes, he does what I assume the three of us would do, which is, I've been given this opportunity. I may never be given this opportunity again. I'm swinging this bat as hard as I humanly can. So, like, you do everything within your power to give it something that is resembling what I guess he would consider to be his way of doing things, which I think it does in a lot of ways. And there's a lot more interesting shots in this than either of the other two. This makes up for the other two not having a lot at all, even.
Yeah, it's actually, I don't think the segment works overall, but directorially, it sets the bar really high for me for the rest of the series. And I think some of the other filmmakers that they're going to tap into will rise up to this particular level. But the fact that he was willing to do all of this crazy shit with the camera and make it as cinematic as possible. When we first meet Joan Crawford and Barry Atwater's talking to her, or Barry Sullivan, I do remember thinking like, God, it looks really set bound. You know, Spielberg's brain must have been on fire that he was having to deal with a television production schedule. But then I noticed later on, after the operation, when she's sitting in that semicircle of statues that she wants to look at as soon as her sight returns, now the lighting is really evocative and it doesn't look like a set at all. Now it actually looks like a house and it gets further and further atmospheric. So I think he actually did a really, really good job with what he could. And I also watched an interview with him this was in the mid 80s, and they asked him about the episode, and he's actually really unhappy with the episode because he said they basically edited it the way they wanted it to be, the way they thought it should be.
We should be thankful Steven Spielberg became successful enough that he can complain about it, because
Yeah.
I guarantee nobody else was.
What's funny is what he's saying doesn't work in the episode is what exactly works in the episode, which is what he contributed to it. Like, the stuff that doesn't work is Serling's, sort of overbaked
Right.
script.
Right.
Yeah, that's very fair. Yeah.
All right.
I really like when she's unwrapping her
Yeah.
head.
That was
nice.
great.
You know what that reminded me of? End of Raiders of the Lost
Oh.
Ark. I don't know why, but the scene where Indy and Marion are sitting there with the spirits going by them, the music evokes that kind of like, it's building to this, and then obviously it's a much different climax in this, but I was sitting thinking to myself, like, man, there it is. There's that Spielbergian tension building that he does so really well in a lot of the things where he needs to build tension. Not every movie, but Spielberg elevated this far beyond where anybody else would.
Yeah, you mentioned the music. The music for the episode overall in each of the individual segments was done by a guy named Billy Goldenberg, who is a very prolific and fantastic composer. In fact, composed the music for Banachek, which I'm talking about on another podcast, and did the music for Spielberg's first sort of official movie that was still on TV,
Oh,
Duel.
nice.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to our final segment. It is entitled The Escape Route. As the previous segments were, this one was written by Rod Serling, but was directed by Barry Shear. That's right, the director of Across 110th Street and Wild in the Street is directing a segment of a late-night television anthology series. It stars Richard Kiley. We've spared no expense. Norma Crane, Sam Jaffe, and George Murdoch tells the story of Gruppenführer Helmut Arndt, a former Nazi concentration camp guard who has escaped to South America after the war, finding himself beset on all sides by not only his conscience and memories, but a group of Mossad agents who are tracking him down. And he can only find solace in the brushstrokes of a painting at a local art museum. What did you gentlemen think of The Escape Route?
It was weird to see George Murdoch in something that wasn't Barney Miller.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, as Scanlon in The Real Bastard Scanlon in Barney.
He is also the main antagonist on Banachek.
oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Lovely.
Yeah. And
Yes,
also,
indeed.
Chris, again, you will see him show up in a Columbo, which I think is a little bit sooner than the Rodney McDowell, if memory serves. I can't remember, but yeah,
like
it's
a year from
very
now?
interesting, the character that he plays, because he's actually another policeman. So you don't get to see a lot of other cops, but he plays another cop. And that's pretty much where I know him from, though I know he played like the dad in Looking for Mr. Goodbar and a few other things. Apparently he wasn't as old as the character was supposed to be. He was definitely not old enough to have been a Nazi in the war, but Sam Jaffe sure was. My goodness, Sam Jaffe always showing up and looking just, I love like the crazy hair and the big beard that he carries around. It's fantastic.
It's a very cultured sort of chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
Sam Jaffe.
Yes. As far as the episode itself, there were some things I liked about it quite a bit. I liked the scenes at the, what would that be, like hotel apartment that he's living in, and especially his conversations with the prostitute, I'm assuming, next door, and especially
Gretchen.
when we get those, like the wall separating the two of them, but the walls are so thin that they can have a conversation with each other. That part I liked the most. I wasn't really getting into him staring at the boat picture that much.
Boy, a lot of staring in this episode. From an episode about watching the world through eyes you don't have to watching nothing but a painting because the world is closing in around you. It's you're here for one reason, right? Which is the hilarious twist at the end. I mean, the twist is funny. The painting is even funnier. And a Nazi gets his comeuppance. So what's not to love about that? I just think that I think you kind of already mentioned it, Father Malone, and I'm gonna cop from you. This was the worst segment of the three for me personally, and the one where I was having the hardest time paying attention and my attention being kept because it was just Richard Kiley running around or talking in a terrible German accent or staring at a boat, just staring at a picture, doing
right,
yeah.
And. Okay, so it wouldn't be interesting if anyone were doing it, but then I think this segment presents a particular dilemma for any viewer or reader of anything, which is our protagonist is a despicable human being.
A Nazi.
On the run for these crimes, and what we're presented here is a tense cat and mouse thriller where we're following it's sort of like I've always thought that, you can put anyone at the center of a movie and they become the hero. I think Taxi Driver is the perfect example of that. And it sort of really slammed home here because, at least Travis Bickle, as disturbed as an individual as he was redeemable. There's not going to be any rebirth for Richard Kiley's Krupenführer character here. So, why do I care if he gets away or doesn't get away?
And he's a very specific kind of Nazi, too. He's a Nazi who wasn't, a conscripted Czechoslovakian like in Saving Private Ryan. He's a proud Nazi.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Who ran because he didn't want to stand trial for his crimes.
And you know what? That could work if this was a different human being. If this were, 20 years later? This is the same dude. His first, his sort of first words are when he's choking the prostitute because she was being too loud outside his door. I want the Mossad to get this guy. I want much worse to happen to this human.
Right.
Having said that, it does avoid some of the pitfalls of Serling's other scripts. I think it's underwritten where he usually overwrites, which I really admired. And as you said, Mike, the stuff between him and the prostitute at the hotel is really good. And I liked her character a lot. I think she was really uncompromising and, really gives back to this prick. It does seem the moral of the story seems to be don't become emboldened by a painting because you'll get drunk and start announcing you're a Nazi. What?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Not only is this guy a despicable character who is on the run from the Mossad, but then he goes around screaming that I'm a Nazi, basically.
Right.
A Nazi in Argentina, isn't that a little on the nose? We expected you here, Mr. Nazi. Jesus. Yeah, it's, again, you can make a Nazi sympathetic, but just not this one, not this kind of Nazi. And I'm not saying that anyone should be trying to make Nazis sympathetic, but fictional Nazis can be sympathetic if written the right way.
Yeah.
This is
Hashtag
so
not
far
all
from
Nazis.
right. It's so strange to me. It's so strange to me because, like you said, you could put any character at the center of a story and write a story around it, but this one is. This guy's like the male equivalent of Joan Crawford from the last episode. I am wanting to see him get tortured. I'm okay. Give him more. Don't just let him be trapped in a painting.
Or how about we have this guy have made some moral change? He's doing decent things. He needs to live to do one good thing, and then that gets taken from him. And fuck you, and get trapped in a painting, you prick.
Yeah, something happens with Sam Jaffe, and he has to rescue him, or something happens with the prostitute. Something. You're right. There needs to be some sort of slight redemption, and then the punishment.
Yeah. This might as well have taken place during the war.
Right.
With him running immediately. It's the same thing. Having said that, now, as soon as the episode began, all I could think was all of these people on the streets need to be worried because there's going to be a huge flash flood in a moment because this is clearly the universal backlog.
Where's Hal Holbrook and fucking Chevy Chase running around?
Right.
Right. I think this is going to be the case for every single episode of the show. I think it's rare that they're going to drift from the backlot, and if they do, it's going to be within an hour of Studio City. But having said that, I think Barry Shear shot it beautifully. It's a lot of close-ups, and then the lighting is gorgeous throughout. I did think a couple of times, because it's a little more action-based, it would have been interesting to see what Spielberg would have done with this episode instead of one trapped in one room. But I think Barry Shear did a fantastic job. And he like Spielberg, like delves into the 70s playbook. Like during the chase scene here, they do a lot of the freeze frame actions. Like at one point, Richard Kiley slaps his hand down on a rain-soaked barrel and the splash gets frozen in the frame. It was gorgeous. So I think a lot, like not only did Spielberg sort of raise the bar as far as what they should be doing for the rest of the series, but I think Barry Shear actually kept it on that level, which now makes me suspect that the rest of the series that we're going to get isn't going to be as good. But so I really like this episode on a technical level, but story-wise, what the hell are you thinking, Rod?
Yeah.
Also, we're not as obsessed with the Holocaust as you were, man, and the Nazis who did it. Like, you know, like
69, they were, man. That was that. They were they're just still processing that.
I think Night Gallery is a good and natural follow-up to the Twilight Zone. I think it's good that it starts up sort of at the tail end of the 60s. Like, I didn't want to hear what Rod Serling had to say in 1966, but I am interested to hear he has to say in 1970.
Right.
So this, which does feel like you've said about what we said about Eyes, this one really feels like a Twilight Zone episode. If this is him getting him out of his system, I'm excited.
Remember when they did this in the Twilight Zone with Death's Head Revisited?
Yeah, I do.
It was good. It was good then.
It was. I mean, this segment isn't terrible by any stretch of the imagination.
It's just not much of anything, honestly.
No, the painting at the end is not... Actually, the painting is fine, but they shot it in a way that you can tell they've just painted Richard Kiley's face over the original painting. Yeah. It's so glaringly lit.
That's why it's so... Oh, man. That's why it's so funny, because it's just his face just...
Yeah. And that's not even Barry Shear's fault. That's like the guys on the studio shooting Rod Serling's fault.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's, yeah, boy, the fact that they looked at that and said, this is the one we're going with, guys. Okay, all right, sure. Boy, yeah. I do like the comeuppance, though. I like that the plant, as our friend Richard Haddam says this, they plant the seed and then they give us the payoff. They show us the little crucifixion painting and then, oh my God, they swapped the painting in the night.
Right.
The corner of the museum is so dark he couldn't see it. Okay. Sure. With the museum's dark tonight, yeah. We just what if they had put anything else there? Just
I know,
the streets of San Francisco. He's just on a trolley car, just
fox hunt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They just happened to put the one
He's
of the
aboard
guy
Old
being,
Ironside.
God.
Yeah.
I do like that at the end they can hear him though. I like that they can hear like the where are we hearing that?
And I do like the idea of him being trapped in a horrifying painting and everything, but I do also maybe have a fundamental problem with depicting victims of the Holocaust in a Christ pose.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
Were they... Oh my God.
Just crack you right over the head with that symbolism, dude. Just crack you.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Subtlety be damned.
Yes, indeed. Overall, skip, watch, not, something. What? We don't have a scale. How many coffins would you give this episode?
How many
brushstrokes in the gallery?
How many crucified Richard Kiley? No expense was spared on that painting, I'll tell you that much. Jesus. I think overall it's an interesting first entry into the show that I kind of just... I'm going into it assuming it's Twilight Zone adjacent because it sure feels that way. I think overall for me, these first three segments that make up the pilot are fun and interesting and they don't feel markedly different from the other show we talked about or the other show I know that this is drawing influence from or the other show that Rod Serling created. I'm referencing Twilight Zone 3 times.
I mean, that first one still haunts me. Second one's decent, and the third one not so much. So yeah, maybe I'd give it like 2 out of 5 coffins.
Yeah,
it's the law of diminishing returns. Like you figure if they'd only reversed the order of segments, then they would have had a fine film.
Oh boy, yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
I like it. I think it's good. I think it what I like is the amount of promise it generates. It feels like the Twilight Zone, but with an infusion of new blood, not just not contemporary blood either, like a new generation sort of picking it up. And I couldn't be happier because it's mostly horror related, and we don't get enough actual horror themed anthologies, I don't think. They're always sort
Even
of
on the horror anthologies.
We're going to take a quick break and play a preview for the next episode, and we'll be right back.
Painting number 1. It's titled The Dead Man. An interesting meeting between flesh and bone, between that which walks and that which, you should excuse the expression, gets buried. So we submit for your approval this and other frozen moments of nightmare placed on canvas. Painting number 2. Something on the abstract side to annotate that which is not abstract at all. Greed, avarice, and man's constant hunger to change what he doesn't like by whatever means. Said means in this case being a little science mixed with a little black magic. Welcome, if you will, the housekeeper.
Till next time, where can people find you, Mike White?
Well, you can always find me talking about movies over at the Projection Booth Podcast, which is available at projectionboothpodcast.com. And we, as Chris mentioned, we are talking about Columbo over on The Shabby Detective. We are all the way up to quite a few episodes by the time this comes out. So come on over, check it out. I believe it's available at shabbydetective.com.
As for me, cstachiw.com. That's where you can find the things I work on. cstachiw.com. That's my link tree.